Good evening, folks. Thanks for tuning into the Will and Dave Show. Tonight, we've got a really fantastic show lined up for you, but a quick little content advisory as we get into it. We're going to be talking about gun control and registration and firearms in general tonight. So this is maybe a bit of a trigger warning, if you will. We'll be talking about that, some of the deaths that are involved in that possibly. And so it's a little heavier subject matter, but nothing too egregious tonight. We just want you to be aware as we get into the show.
Welcome to the Will and Dave Show.
A trigger warning?
A trigger warning. I can't claim that I wrote that joke.
No,
but it is premeditated.
Because it came from the rest of us on the show. We had to talk you into it. Well, let me turn the music down. I'm tired of that already.
What can I say? I'm a slut for views.
Allison has done her thing. We need to turn it off now. How's your week been, William?
That's been pretty good, actually. It's been productive.
How's life on Twitter?
I hate it.
Twitterverse.
But I'm there.
Yes.
For those of you who are on Twitter, we are on Twitter now too. By we, I mean me. You can follow us for my hot takes,
for your
salty
retweets. So who did you retweet this week?
I retweeted something from Matt Walsh, I believe, or I think I quote tweeted it. I think I also quote tweeted something of Ben Shapiro's and something of
Okay,
hold on. Comment off a PragerU video.
So if you retweeted them, I'm assuming you did so with a comment?
So retweeting is just projecting the tweet that they made through your platform. Quote tweeting it is when I quote it and add a comment of my own.
So you retweeted a Ben Shapiro?
I think so. I think it was. I'd have to look. It's
like you actually agreed with something that Ben Shapiro said?
I wouldn't say I agreed it. I just wanted it on our page, and I think it was because it was so like eye rolling that I figured people would get it. They didn't need me to critique it.
And Matt Walsh, who's one of your heroes, like right after Tucker Carlson.
Oh no, I hate Matt Walsh way more than Tucker Carlson because Tucker Carlson is an actor who I think is just careless with his power. I think Matt Walsh actually believes the crap that he sells. So
okay, so hold on a second. So if Tucker Carlson is like a 9.5 on your punchability meter, where's Matt Walsh?
On the punchability meter, he's actually not that high up. He's a relatively normal, decent looking guy. It's his hot takes that I have issues with.
So
I actually dislike his ideas and his policies more than I dislike the look of his face.
So I'm not involved much on the Twitter universe thing because I absolutely hate it. But I do read Matt Walsh, and I am a more right of center sort of guy, and I get choked at some of the stuff that Matt Walsh says. I like some of it, I do, because
Mm-hmm.
he speaks to my side of the universe, but
Yeah.
how he says it, he's a jerk.
Yeah. Yeah. Like just this morning, he tweeted about him and his wife are like taking a drive or spending a day out in a park, and he's like, "Sure, I'm glad we quote unquote stole this land." I'm like, could you be more of a dick? Like, I understand his political take, but could you be more of an asshat about it? Please try harder. Offend more people. Why don't you?
Yeah. Okay. So before we alienate all three of our viewers, let's move on to our sponsors, as we still want them to sponsor the show,
Yeah.
and since we're related to both of them. The sponsor for this episode is Northern Truss, your one-stop shop for floor systems and for all your truss needs. Phone the team at Northern Truss at 250-787-3033, locally owned and operated in Fort St. John, BC.
Hey there, and thanks for tuning into the Will and Dave Show. I'm Susan, and I don't know about you, but I think that in the whole world there's nothing as warm and comforting as a handmade quilt. And quilters the world over have wonderful stories to tell. So to showcase their stories, I host a podcast. It's called Measure Twice, Cut Once, and Other Life Lessons Learned from Quilters. You can tune in to the podcast anywhere that podcast apps are, whatever your favorite is, or you can find a direct link on my website, stitchedbysusan.com. And now, back to the show.
Hey,
Howdy doody. Well, we appreciate our sponsors. If the viewer, want to help us out directly with the show, you can go to www.buymeacoffee.com/Will and Dave Show. And for the price of a cup of coffee, you can help support the show as we try to grow it and move it along.
well, actually, you can buy me a cup of coffee for $5. And if I send it to Will, it'll buy him a house, because in Canada, $5 of American money will buy him a house. So you can put him in a real house. I also want to say about the Buy Me a Coffee that one of the fallouts really from our show is if we mention guns or vaccine or COVID or any of those,
Which
they
is
all
like
are
every
words.
episode.
Yeah, which we will never be monetized on YouTube.
Yeah.
As soon as you say any of those words, they look at you and say, yeah, we're not going to monetize you, and we're going to keep all the ad money from every show you ever run. And so
Yeah.
it sort of is our only means of support is buy me a coffee. So if you want to support the show, you can buy us a coffee.
Yeah.
That's enough selling, Will.
Yeah. So let's get to the meat and potatoes of tonight.
Yeah.
Talk about our guest and what we're going to talk about tonight. So tonight we're going to talk about, obviously, gun control and registration and everything that kind of revolves around that. And to talk about that, we brought in someone substantially more knowledgeable than ourselves. That's the low bar to clear. But
Hey, Wayne, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks.
Are you sure you want to do this?
Sure, absolutely.
So why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, what you've done and what you do?
I work in the oil field service industry up here in northern BC. Pertaining to the show, I've been in competition firearms for about 18 years. As speaking of low bars, my memory is not that great from that far ago. But
if I recall, you used to compete in IDPA, right?
yes, that's where I
IDPA?
started. Actually, I was
Right.
thinking after you invited me, I was thinking back over the years, and I realized that it's all my wife's fault. She's the one who arranged my first handgun, which is when I got into International Defense Pistol Association, which is IDPA.
Mm.
I did that for quite a few years, and then through that met a lot of the guys I hang out with today, and started doing 3-gun competitions about 8 years ago.
Okay.
So we should honor our guest and call them fire sticks, and maybe then we
Right,
won't
right.
get demonetized.
Right.
Fair enough.
We'll have to remember that for
Cord-
future episodes.
That's right.
Cordless hole punches.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
Boomsticks.
So as you're in Canada, and I think a number of our viewers are also in Canada, would you outline the current system for owning a gun and what you're allowed to own and the responsibilities if you do own if it's a handgun, etc.
Well,
for us.
let's break it down and start with just how to get one,
Yeah.
legally speaking.
The first thing you need to do is take a course. They're relatively widely available. You just have to find one in your area. Once you're done taking that course, it's a full day and you have to pay for it. Then you fill out the rest of the form that you'll get when you finish the course from the instructor and mail that into the RCMP. And anywhere from, if you're lucky, 2 months to a year later, you'll get a license, which allows you to buy a firearm and or ammunition of a certain type.
And yeah, I was saying that's just your unrestricted.
Correct. And
So
so to
what
get a
constitutes a
restricted,
restricted firearm?
you have to do another day-long course and send in. If you were to do them both at the same time, you could submit the application at the same time for both. But if you were not, you would have to do the process twice. You would have to submit your application, then do another course and submit your application for your restricted. So restricted is it's fairly complicated. All the technical details are on the RCMP's website, but it has to do with length and function of the firearm. Most semi-automatic rifles are restricted, and all handguns are restricted.
So why the differentiation from American standpoint? And I know, although I'm sort of asking for those of us who are in the U.S. So why the differentiation for handguns? I get it for automatic weapons or semi-automatic, I guess. But why handguns? Is there a logical explanation, or not logical because government? I won't say that, but is there reasoning on the government side for doing that?
Not particularly. Handguns have been registered in Canada since, I believe, 1932. And then in the 90s, when the current iteration of firearms law was implemented, they became restricted. I mean, you hit the nail on the head, Dave. There is no logical reason for them to be restricted other than
My assumption has always
possibly
been concealability.
Exactly. They are easy to conceal. But on the flip side of that, there's a lot of stuff that's not restricted that is easy to conceal as well. So
one of the memes
your
I was
guess is
going
as good as mine.
I was going to show later that if we're going to do if there is a blame for murders in the U.S., it should be Home Depot and not the gun manufacturers. More people are killed by hammers than by guns in the U.S. in a year. And I don't know if the numbers are true, so I didn't save it as I couldn't verify the numbers. But it was sort of the logic is a question of this show is the logic of these
I mean, that's
laws and rules.
Unfortunately, that's the fallacy of gun control. Is honestly, it's incompetent, unknowledgeable people making laws to convince other unknowledgeable people that they're making a difference. That's really all it is.
So I want to ask you, about a year ago, there's a shooting in New Brunswick, I believe, or Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and immediately after there was a new law that was either implemented or was initiated.
It was proposed, I believe. I don't know if it ever actually went through.
So has it gone through? Is it a law? And what was that exactly?
So shortly after that happened, the government passed by order in council a ban of specific firearms.
Okay.
There's a list. It's called the FRT. It lists all the banned firearms in the country. And many, at the time, I think there was about 1,500, and since then a lot more have been added that are named specifically that are not allowed in the country. And many of us sport shooters have many of those firearms. The main one is an AR-15, and anything that's sort of, XYZ company's iteration of an AR-15.
Yeah, any derivative thereof.
So exactly. There's a lot other ones, but that's the main one. Those firearms we can't sell, we can't transport, we can't do anything with them. They are now residing in our safe permanently. It's illegal for us to take them out of the safe.
So I'll ask you on that again. I know that one of the rules for handguns is if you own one, you really are limited in how you can use it and where you can go with it. Is that correct?
Yes, the only place you're allowed to use it at is an approved range.
So if I'm
So
going hiking in the Rocky Mountains, and again, I want a gun to protect myself from grizzly bears.
Not a
you
handgun.
can do that. There is a permit you can get, but it's very difficult to get and very specific. Like for an example, you can't get a permit to take your Glock 19 into the wilderness for bear defense because that's unreasonable. And I would agree with that. But at the same time, you in order to get that permit, you need to list the specific firearm you're going to use and where. But you can do that. It's just
Paperwork.
highly uncommon. Yeah.
Right. I believe that one of the options or the exemptions, if I remember right, is actually is for trappers, right? There's an exemption
anyone.
for trapping
No,
for using handgun, isn't
not
there?
specifically for trapping, but
Okay.
those are the purposes that you could get a permit to do that, right? Like the idea behind why you would want a handgun instead of a shotgun, for example, is you're working or using both of your hands, and long guns get in the way. So you would want your handgun also near you and ready to use in a place that it's
Right.
quickly available, obviously. And so they're easy to do that with.
Have you ever heard of anybody using one of those exemptions or licenses to do that? Have you ever heard of anybody getting the approval to do that?
I believe I know one person that used to work for forestry, and I have no idea if he still does or not, that did have a permit for that. But he carried a 460 Smith & Wesson. So that's
A hand
a
cannon.
hand cannon, if there ever was one. Yeah,
Right. So that would kill a bear if it attacked it.
absolutely.
Yeah.
9 mil would
Well, just-
not, I'm assuming.
No.
No,
Lord, no.
9mm would piss off a bear.
Gotcha.
And you might be okay against a small black bear, but it's about when you're talking about defending yourself from a charging animal, you're talking about energy transferred to the animal, and handguns just don't have it.
Right.
It's not just a matter of
Generally
killing it; it's a
speaking.
matter of stopping it.
Correct. Yeah.
Your 9mm may kill it, but it's probably going to kill you first. And
Well,
then
that's
it's
just
gonna
the
go
thing. But I personally, when I'm in the woods, I use either a 12 gauge or a 45-70, both of which have a massive amount of lead transfer. So
that's a new term I've never heard, a massive amount of lead transfer. That is like
There
an
you go.
old 460 carburetor that
Yeah.
you did lead gasoline was high amounts
right.
of lead transfer.
yeah, yeah. Just for I don't remember the exact amount. I think it's about 800 grains in an ounce, and a 9mm bullet is 124 grains, a typical one. And both a 12 gauge and a 45-70 are pretty close to 1 ounce in the bullet weight. So that gives you an idea of the force transfer.
So I should ask you,
Anyway.
is I believe, so years ago, I was licensed in Canada, but it's been a lot of years since I've done the course. If I remember right, all automatics, you're all banned in Canada. Is that right?
All
Oh, yeah.
fully automatic are prohibited. Yes.
So what's the reasoning behind that?
Um,
I'm not asking logic. I'm just asking what the reasoning is behind that.
well, again, from experience, I can tell you that a fully automatic weapon is just about useless in a practical sense. Very fun, probably. I've only ever shot them at ranges in Vegas, so that was enjoyable. But I mean, a lot of it, honestly, is a guess that
Right.
it comes from the perception of what they can do from movies, which is wildly inaccurate. So I really have no answer for that. They're not to be used by people that are untrained because
Right.
they're very hard to handle. But if you use them in a safe way, there's no reason that anyone shouldn't be able to get one.
So a little bit later in the show, we're going to look at some memes and again some of the humorous ideas of where these things are rooted. But there really is not a lot of logic, even for some progressives, i.e. William, in the idea of gun control. And I'm not saying none. I'm saying there's not a lot.
And This is the point where I'm gonna come in and explain that I'm gonna perturb anyone who watches the show and is progressive like myself. Generally speaking, when it comes to gun control, I don't like it, because I actually do largely side with both of you that most of the rules implementations that we have in Canada, specifically around firearms registration and gun control, are enacted by people who do not understand what they're doing. They're reactionary. And Wayne hit it on the head, I think, when he talked about the perception of what a fully automatic firearm can do. A lot of, I think, the laws that we write in Canada are written around a perception and metrics and how it looks for voters and things like that, as opposed to actually what is logical, what makes sense. Like the banning of AR-15s. There are so many weapons. There are so many firearms that do the exact same thing that an AR-15 can do, that aren't going to be on that list because they're not an AR-15. An AR-15 is just that's the bad man gun. That no good. No bad man gun. Bad man gun bad. Can't
If
have.
you're gonna say things like that, at least can you do it in like a different accent? Because no English speaking person talks like that. Do your Tonto speak or something,
Oh, good lord, that'll go over well. No,
or some other speak. Because I have never heard any English speaking person.
it's not about the English speaking. It's about the lack of intelligence involved.
Oh,
It's
okay.
dumbing it down to
Yeah.
like the lowest.
Gotcha.
It's creating rules when you're functioning below the mental poverty line that is leading to decisions like that.
Yeah, you're totally right. The AR-15, I think, has been used in about a grand total of 3 crimes on record in Canada, and this ban was focused around that firearm. So there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's a kicking horse for vote getting. That's all it is.
Yeah, like just as an example, like I have a wish list of firearms that I would love to own one day, and one of them is an
I promise you,
it.
they're all on the list.
Well, they weren't until relatively recently, but there's one, and it just by changing the barrel length on the gun changes its classification as to whether or not it is an AR or a hunting rifle. The only thing that changes on it
You mean
is,
whether it's restricted or not restricted?
yeah, sorry, whether it's restricted or
Yeah.
not.
Yep.
And that's all that changes. It doesn't change the major functionality of the firearm doesn't really change. I mean, obviously, its accuracy over long ranges will change, and its concealability will change mildly, but to such a
So-
small degree as to be negligible.
So why is that the case, Wayne? If you're familiar with these, why? And again, I'm asking for the reasoning and behind that. If you have, I don't know what the lengths are. If you have a shotgun with an 8-inch barrel, or a 30-inch barrel, I kind of know what lengths are. So you can clarify that. But why the difference in the classification on the length of the barrel?
It's got to be concealability. The length of the barrel classification is mixed with the overall length. Right. So it's 18.5-inch barrel or 26 inches overall length. Anything that's less than either of those two would be a restricted. So my AR-15 that I have is a 16. So it's either way, even if ARs were to not be restricted by name, it would be anyways.
Right.
Yeah.
So in my research this afternoon, I was reading about all the rifles and the classification in the U.S. And one of the common misconceptions is that an AR-15 is an assault rifle, and that AR actually means assault rifle, and it means nothing of the
No.
sort, and it's not an assault rifle.
It's not.
No.
AR means Armalite rifle, which is the original manufacturer of Eugene Stoner's design back in the 70s, 60s.
Yeah, the
and
AR-15 is a brand, not a classification.
Right.
Correct.
And yet in everybody's mind, including in the voters, and this is why it's used in these laws and these bills, it's called an assault rifle. And it's not an assault rifle. An assault rifle is a completely different animal.
Yeah.
Right.
Even
So,
if there is an assault rifle, I don't even know if there is a classification of an assault rifle. Is there, Wayne? As you might know.
No. An assault rifle, by definition, has select or full auto fire, so it would be banned in our system. It would be classified as prohibited. But that's the difference between an AR-15 and in Canada it would be a C7, or in the United States an M4 carbine. An actual assault rifle they are full auto.
Gotcha. So I will.
Or burst.
or burst.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just had to throw that in there for technical correction. The M16 assault rifles are not full auto; they're burst only.
So to put this in the jargon of married people and people who know what I'm talking about, you can have a single shot, which is an old guy who's been married for 50 years. You can have the semi-auto, which is a guy who just newly married about 5 years ago. Or you can have the burst, which is a kid on his first date.
Kind of, yes.
Sorry, Will. I was going to go there, but I was going to do it in rifle terms. I've been thinking about that all day long.
Okay.
I'm probably going to lose my license. I won't get banned for that, except I will for vaccine and COVID.
I think the kid on the first date we would call negligent discharge. Throw some gun humor for you.
Oh my gosh. So we're aiming into this land of explaining the
Rationale.
the lack of rationale. The word that came to mind was lunacy. And that it probably is overboard a little bit for those who are sort of in the middle of the fence or on the fence on this. Although I think if you look at the logic of gun laws, it's hard to logically implement them. There's no criminal is going to register his gun or use a legally obtained gun as a rule. Is that not correct?
Pretty
For the
much.
most part, yeah.
One of the hardest things I have to try to explain to myself some days is, it's already illegal to shoot people or to kill people, if you will.
Right.
So why is it illegal to do it a specific way? And that's really what it boils down to. What gun control is, it just makes crimes that are already crimes more criminal if you have a gun.
Right, which is saying it's illegal or it's more illegal.
Right.
Yeah, it's illegaler.
It's illegal.
It's illegaler.
There we
It's
go.
illegaler.
So it boggles the mind some days. And for some people, sorry to cut you off, Will, some people that are maybe on the fence or don't quite understand the system or the laws in a practical sense, it would encourage you to go out with, I'm sure somebody's got a friend that's gun nut, for lack of a better term, and see how they work on a functional level. Have someone show you some real guns and how they work and the laws surrounding them. It becomes pretty clear pretty fast that whoever wrote the laws didn't know anything about it.
We could say that about a lot of laws, I think, but
true.
this one is really obvious. I mean, it's hard to look at that.
Yeah. This is where I want to push back on the word lunacy, but not push back the way you think I'm going to push back on it. Is I don't think it's lunacy. I think it's incredibly. I think it's a tactical choice, because basically using gun control and scary firearms as a political football or punching bag, it's the gift that keeps on giving for progressive politicians. If you want something that your voter base is gonna absolutely adore you to talk about, and that the other guys are not, gun control. Guns are bad. And they just keep picking apart that concept of guns are bad in ways that, as people who know something about firearms, sounds absolutely ridiculous. But people who don't know much about firearms, they're like, oh wow, yeah, that's pretty scary stuff. It's a dead horse that they're going to keep beating until it stops spitting out votes.
Yep.
So far, it keeps spitting out votes, so I don't think we're anywhere near the end. And that is a problem. And I think at this stage, you get into the conspiracy side where they know it's dumb, they keep doing it as it works for them, and not because it makes anybody safer, but because it gives them votes. And I can't help but believe that politicians know that.
Yeah.
Somebody does. The politicians themselves may not, but somebody who says, yeah, this is a good idea, sure does.
Yeah. So in the light of that, I think we want to go into the memes a little bit, and then we'll end. Or no, I want to look at the difference in applications, actually, as there is, and we talked before the show on this. we looked at if we wanted to get to look at the difference in applications for owning a rifle or any gun in Canada, if you are a white or Caucasian, or if you are First Nations or of
Well,
Indian
I think our initial search was
descent.
just any differences in registration, and this is one of the first ones that jumped out at us was that
Yeah.
there are differences between me registering
Oops.
for a firearm and someone who has their oh, what's the term? It's not a First Nations card, but their First Nation status.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I ran into is that if you are Aboriginal in Canada, you list all your name, your address, and everything, and then you have to have a reason for owning a rifle or a gun of any kind. And that's okay. I get that. And then you can give an elder or leader's information, who is an elder or leader on the reserve or the tribe or of the nation or whatever they are. And then you sign it.
There can be any. I assume that applies to everyone because I would have a similar section just without the elder classification. Any leader or any peer who vouches for me. Essentially, it's someone vouching for you, is it not?
It's a reference, yes. And then
Yeah.
you get the reference in the elder or leader recommendation.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the end.
Yeah, it's just extra slots for extra
Yeah.
references.
Mm-hmm.
Or we can look at one for you and me.
Mm-hmm.
You have to say a whole bunch more stuff. You have to have your proof of identity, which is not in the other one. You have to list your personal history.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever
Conjugal
been
status?
Yes, have you, including your marital status? And I want to ask you, Wayne,
Mm-hmm.
is there a rash of shooters in Canada who are divorced?
I don't think so.
There's a rash of suicides from people who have recently ended long-term relationships.
That's
It's less
the
about
reason that information is on this application. Yes, is to
But wouldn't
avoid.
that have been in 16 letter D, not in 16F?
I don't know.
Have you ever threatened or attempted suicide? Have you ever suffered or Oh, whoa. We have to come back here. Okay. And then we go into our conjugal status,
Mm-hmm.
which again, it depends if you've been married for 50 years or your first date.
Yep.
Who your partner is.
Mm-hmm.
And if the partner has any concerns, they're supposed to call.
Mm-hmm. And see, I like the fact that this section exists within the application. I just sit here and wonder, why is that not in the other application?
Okay, and the
I'm okay with those
information
questions.
and the information about your formal conjugal partner.
Mm-hmm.
So if you got a divorce and your ex is mad at you, she can nix your gun application right here.
Yep.
She
All
can
she has to do
certainly
is save
make
the
it
right
really
thing.
difficult, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to go through the course.
Mm-hmm.
If you've taken the course, you have to do one reference and a second reference and a photo guarantor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and there are fees if you're not First Nations.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Why the difference?
Part of it is that it's a little ironic, but part of it is that it's considered part of the natives or Aboriginal people of Canada's heritage to hunt,
Mm-hmm.
but not so much for ours, which is strange.
So I understand that, except I don't understand if the issue is safety.
Mm-hmm. Then why the loophole or the omission?
Right.
Yeah.
So why the difference? If the whole idea of this is for safety, I absolutely agree. If their historical use is for hunting, I get that.
Yeah,
But
this comes right back to it being a political. It's purely political, and on a progressive side of things, putting restrictions on an Aboriginal's right to own a firearm is gonna track bad. That's gonna go over badly. That's gonna cost them voters on the reserves, so they won't do it.
Yep.
It has nothing to do in that specific sense. I don't think it has anything to do with safety whatsoever. It has everything to do with locking in votes.
my eye is starting to twitch. And
Yeah.
my eye twitches when I come across this amazingly illogical
It's
system.
hypocrisy. It's
Oh, it
it's
is. Yeah.
clear
It
and present hypocrisy.
it really shows that it's not really about safety. It's about optics and votes.
Hmm.
When these differences are so front and center.
So what if I get this right? And Will, I'd like you to chime in on this. This is a progressive idea. This whole thing about guns is really a progressive idea.
Gun. Okay,
Registration and
which
control. Really, it resides in the
mostly
left.
yes, mostly yes.
Well, no, I think you could say it entirely relies on the left. I don't think there's a whole lot of Republican or conservative voters in Canada or the U.S. who go, yay, yay, gun control.
Yeah,
It
gun
exists
control,
on the
absolutely not.
left-hand
Yeah,
side of center.
yeah. Gun control is definitely a left thing. Gun registration might be a
Why?
little more mixed, but gun control is definitely left.
Why is this a hill that they really want to die on?
Okay, are we talking people or politicians?
People, because it isn't only politicians. I mean, I've heard lots of
So
kids who defend this who don't have an eye to history.
because to them, it's the way it's been branded and sold to them is that by dying on this hill, they are potentially saving lives. That they are doing something better for their community. They're making their lives and their potential children's lives safer by making the world they live in safer. It's because it has been branded, packaged, and sold to them as such. I don't think I don't blame these kids like the kids from down in the states. What is it? Stonewall Jackson shooting and everything. Those kids that are still involved in rallies and
Mm-hmm.
movements. I don't blame those kids. I blame the people that are shoveling it to the kids. That them doing that is somehow going to make some substantial difference.
Right.
There
Agreed.
are ways to make differences. That ain't it.
Yep.
But it tracks really well.
So are
It gets
we
votes.
all in agreement on this show? Holy cow, has that ever
It's
happened,
hard to
William?
believe,
Jeez. Okay, we're going to
especially
go
on a
back.
topic like this.
Yeah, we're going to go back to our memes. I guess there's some good ones. And we should cover these
Now you
because
might get some pushback when it comes to the memes, but
it's fun. Okay. Here's the first one.
This is
this is the
you
close.
described this one as your pro gun
This is the
control.
closest we could get to pro gun control.
This is the closest one I could come to pro gun control was this. Yeah. I really need. What kind of gun is that, Wayne?
That is either an AR-15 or an M4
And those
assault
are illegal
rifle.
in Canada, right?
No, AR-15s are, well, they are now. Yes.
Okay. So
Just
this is everywhere. Go ahead, Will. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I want to actually tie the previous image and this image together. When people complain that they can't defend themselves in the government if they don't have these guns,
Right.
this is the thought that I always come back to: is if the government wants to kill you, they're not going to have an AR they're not going to have a gunfight with you. They're just they're gonna drone strike your ass into
Right.
oblivion. It's they're operating like if you're thinking that you're going to resist the government as a whole, in individual instances, sure, and in a home self defense instance, sure.
Right.
But resisting the government on a large scale front, I don't think is that arms race isn't even remotely fair anymore.
It isn't,
Fighting on two
but
different levels.
you're thinking of small groups of people. If
Mhm.
gun control isn't a thing and people are not barred from arming themselves, then it becomes a bunch of equipment and a few operators against a nation.
Mhm.
And that's a very different thing.
So also in the research for doing this and for looking for memes, I came across an article, and it was by a Jewish. He was a professor at Columbia, I believe, and he wrote an article on gun control, Nazi Germany gun control.
Mhm.
And it was interesting. Is actually again the Nazis they relinquished a lot of gun control for Germans and not for Jews, and so it was used as a means for controlling the Jews and
Mhm.
not the general populace. And this is where you get a lot of gun people who say, well, if the government really wants to remove the guns, they must have an ulterior motive, as that is why Nazi Germany did it.
Right.
There was an ulterior motive. It was not overall all gun control in Nazi Germany. It only was for the Jews.
And if you break it down, like what we've been talking about tonight, in essence, it is an ulterior motive in the sense that it's votes. I
Right.
don't think it's quite as mustache twirling and sinister as planning some sort of hostile takeover, but certainly planning a political takeover. Sure, absolutely.
Would you do that again, Will? Your
The
mustache?
mustache twirling.
Yeah, that was good.
Thank you. It's my version of the tinfoil hat.
This is where you need your trigger warning. I do believe that this
Yeah.
is photoshopped. I don't think this is a real photo, although it makes the point.
It's definitely doctored, but yeah.
Will, you may want to read these for our audience.
Right. So for those of you who are listening and not reading, it says gun control doesn't mean what you think it means. It means only the state will have guns. If you think that's a good idea, you need to read a history book.
What kind of gun is that in the bunker, Wayne? Any idea?
Oh, in
In
the
the
bunker?
bunker, that looks like a World War II era rotary machine
Yeah.
gun.
Yeah, that's a Browning MG, I believe.
This is a good one because what's this actor's name? Will, you know him? Sam.
I should know.
But he
this.
always gets put in these memes.
It's
Yeah.
funny because
It's-
he's California
It's
born,
because
born and bred. He's been an actor since he was like 18. He's a California boy through and through.
yeah.
And liberal as they
I
come.
don't know. Yeah, I was going to say I don't know his personal standing, but I think the reason he gets put in these is his appearance and voice.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, Will, you want to read this one in his voice?
I can't do his voice. I'm not that. I don't have the timbre for that.
You can just
You
read
actually
it.
believe criminals will obey gun control laws? You're a special kind of stupid, aren't you?
So we're going to get into that in one of the future ones here that I have. Again, isn't that far away? It's actually this one.
Yeah. 84,999,987 legal firearm owners killed no one yesterday.
So, and
I don't know
this
where they
is
got the
one
number,
of,
but
yeah, I think it's a made up number for the plaque.
still.
This is one
The
of
idea
the
tracks.
arguments that every guy against any kind of gun control will say. Since when are legal gun owners? When are they killing people? And are there any cases of this?
Very, very few. They're definitely the minority.
I'll just take this opportunity to kick in a Canadian reference, and that is that legal firearms owners, like licensed firearms owners,
Yeah.
are the people in Canada least likely to commit a crime. Sitting parliament representatives are more likely to commit crime than we are.
Well, any
Take that,
politician is
politicians.
more likely to commit a crime.
I know. I just had to throw that in there.
Yeah.
And this
This
is one
one's
of
long.
the famous ones from Reagan. And I'll let you read it out.
the actor.
The
Okay.
actor.
You won't get gun control by disarming law-abiding citizens. There's only one way to get real gun control. Disarm the thugs and the criminals. Lock them up, and if you don't actually throw away the key, at least lose it for a long time. It's a nasty truth, but those who seek to inflict harm are not fazed by gun controllers. I happen to know this from personal experience.
And I don't know if he actually said that. And
I
I'm
have no
sure there
idea.
are lots of holes in that we could we could poke.
But the rough idea still holds water.
It does.
Yep.
That gun control isn't really going to stop criminals from getting firearms to begin with.
You can read this one, Will, and again, then we'll go back and talk about it because I like
A
this
wolf
one.
attacks a sheep, the sheep dies. Other sheep observe the killing and notice that the teeth killed the sheep. The sheep remove their own teeth for their own safety. The wolf still has its teeth and can still kill sheep. I mean, I don't think the sheep are really using their
much.
teeth to kill much of anything, but yes, the idea still tracks.
Is there as an owner of guns and obviously of one who owns an AR-15, so you must actually at heart you really are a bad guy, Wayne.
I totally am.
Is there
Not to
is
the
there-
core.
Is there any amount of logical ideas for gun laws or registration,
Or registration.
etc.? Is there any amount? I know in the U.S. it's like absolutely not. I don't want to have anybody know that I own guns and I shouldn't have to. But is there a logical
Well-
argument for some?
The only logical reason to register a firearm is to help trace it if it's ever stolen. But most people that steal them destroy the traceability on them. So it kind of defeats the purpose. The other reason that's often spouted for registration is so that if a police officer has to go to X person's home for a visit, they can look up that person and see if they own any guns, which is a bit of a fallacy in logic, because if I was in that job, I would pretty much assume that if I had to go to somebody's house to do a house call, then either they have them, or
You would assume they have
whether they're
them, period.
registered or not, they
Right.
have them.
Yeah, I would think
Like,
there's a ton of
that's
other red flags that would come up way before whether or not they own a firearm. Are they mentally
true.
unstable? Do they have a criminal record? Those are
Yeah,
all other trackable things.
Right. So this
totally.
is one that we should look at. Is there any sort of logical reason for background investigation or checks?
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
I think, like, if I can't remember the specific rules in Canada, but if there's certain laws that if you've been convicted of them, you can't have a license. So,
Yeah.
to some degree, I'm of the opinion that unless it's a very serious crime, anybody should be able to get a rifle or a shotgun that's capable of hunting, so that they can provide for their family. But those are also not typically the weapons that are used in crimes. It's generally speaking handguns, and especially illegally imported handguns, that are used in crimes. So, but as a rule of thumb, I would say yes, a background check is reasonable. I believe the Liberal government is attempting to lengthen the background check for applicants to their entire life, which I think is ridiculous.
I mean, I think it applies to certain crimes, but
I
at
don't,
what point, like, how far back is it going to go?
right,
Like, can you hold somebody who committed a crime at the age of 12, went to juvie, no matter how violent that is, they were still growing up. If the rest of their
totally,
life has been spick and span, are we going to just cut them off from that completely?
exactly. So I think that's a little unreasonable, but I believe the current rule is 10 years.
It's sort of interesting in looking at the application for owning a firearm in Canada. The inference that if you are divorcee or bankrupt, etc., you are likely to cause harm either for others or yourself. And I'll give you the
More
suicide
likely.
portion. Well,
It's statistical stress is all it is. Like that's why I assume
okay.
they're putting it in there. Now, whether or not I think that's a particularly, whether that variable carries as much weight as they seem to treat it, or
Right.
seem to think it does, I'm not sure. But I think that's why is they're looking at or looking for things that would place an extreme amount of stress on a person.
So
So
I
let
look
me,
at that and I think, why the focus on that, on the marital, on your previous husband or wife? Is that, to me, it gives grounds for a lot of manipulation of the system.
it does, but I believe statistically speaking, just talking about murder in general, you're more
Mm.
likely to be murdered by a family member than any other person. So
Hmm.
that's probably where that comes from.
Yeah.
But also, I'll throw in that given the length of time it takes to get a license, this isn't the route that someone would go if they
Yeah.
were going to flip out and murder their spouse or their old boss that
Yeah.
just canned them or whatever. So it's a little bit of a misnomer that it's even there, because
Yeah. In Canada, that's
someone's
not
not
the same.
someone's not going to wait a year to get a license, legally purchase a firearm and ammunition, and then go on a killing spree for something that happened a year ago.
Right.
Yeah.
That doesn't
Or
make any
even a
sense.
week ago.
Yeah. They would have
Yeah.
they would have moved on or found another way to do it. If they're
Right.
intent on violence, they'll find another way.
Right.
It was actually, am I looking for memes? I found one I mentioned in the pre-show chat. There's a meme that Home Depot ought to be held more liable for for deaths in Canada and the U.S. than any gun manufacturer. More people are killed by hammers than guns.
Or drunk driving. Just ban alcohol.
Or or texting and driving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another.
Oh, that one would be so easy to fix. Pokemon Go fixed that.
It's true.
Pokemon Go has a system in the game where if you're moving past like 15 kilometers an hour, the game won't function because it knows that you're driving while using it.
But
All you have to do is install that on phones so that if you're going faster than 15 miles an hour, you can't text.
but
No more
what if
texting
you're
and
a
driving.
passenger?
Yeah.
What if you're
I
a
mean,
passenger?
sure.
Hmm.
I'm just saying that there are options.
Okay.
That was more of a joke than like a
Okay.
legitimate
Oh,
ironclad
good.
idea.
That's a
Yeah.
that's a lousy idea because I text and I didn't say that out loud.
It's just
Go-
another obvious hole in the logic is that if it was really about safety, there's a lot of other things that this amount of money that's spent on gun control could be spent on and
Mhm.
effectively save people.
That's the part that gets my goat is the amount of money that is sunken into doing something that isn't making very much difference.
Yeah,
Like
there's been a lot of
that's what really
studies
gets me.
done. Yeah, there's been a lot of studies done by a lot of pretty high universities,
Mhm.
high caliber universities, and the CDC even. There's little or no difference made by gun control. So
I think that you can easily see that if you look at it from the perspective of logic.
mhm.
But I also know that when you look at politics, a lot of it isn't logical. It gets another end in me. There's another end in mind. If it be
Mhm.
votes, if it be for
Yeah,
control of an
No,
absolutely.
election, if it be for claiming a narrative,
yeah,
you may use it as a tool. And I wonder if this is not just another example.
yeah. I would like. I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up a more American aspect of this story. But when we talk about the difference between gun control and gun registration, this is where my progressivism is going to show a little bit, and that I think gun registration of at least some form or factor should be mandatory. I mean, you have to register to drive a vehicle. You should have to register to own a firearm. And in the States, there's still a lot of ways to access firearms legally that don't require any kind of background check or waiting period. A lot of states have things
No,
like gun show loopholes.
there's no gun show loopholes. There's no way to buy a firearm in the United States without getting a background check.
I'm
Hmm.
going to look that up right now, actually, as because you guys can
Uh,
argue that. I'm going to
now,
look it up.
Well, no, I
I'm
have to
talk
know before.
I'm talking about at a store, right? Like, I mean, obviously, what people do between themselves privately, there's you can't control, but
Yeah, that's just it. Is that
yeah,
that's the private sale is where that loophole comes into effect. It's not at stores. No, you're absolutely
right.
right.
So while you're looking, I'll ask you a question. Are you talking about registering of the individual or the firearm?
Hmm. I would
Because
just
you're
think the individual having the right to purchase the firearm.
okay. So I would agree in one sense, and that is that I think it's reasonable to expect that if someone wants to own a firearm, they need to know the
How to
risks
use one.
associating with using it. And
Yeah,
there is no other way to document that someone has done it than to do that. Though I
exactly.
don't think that it should bar a person from being able to get them.
See, I just feel that similar to a driver's license, a person has to show that they have at least a cursory knowledge of the thing they're trying to do and
Right.
documentation to prove that they've yeah.
That's why I asked the question is because your statement implied you're talking about the individual as opposed to the firearm.
Yes.
Right.
So I'm
So
looking.
I would agree in some ways.
Yeah, because
I'm
I
looking
think
in
that gun control or gun control in the sense of certain specific, especially when you're getting into like the specifics of rifles and things that gun control makes virtually no difference in. There's no reason for that to exist or be enforced or for us to waste money on it. We could be spending that money on things that save way more lives, so many more lives,
True.
and do so much more good for our communities than just shoveling money into a fire like that.
I'm just looking
And as
here. Just give me just a
the
second.
the gun I can give you the brief rundown of the gun show loophole, Dave, and it's for the private sale of firearms. So if you're at a private sale event
Well,
in some
no,
states, you can sell without having to provide any identification or background check.
that's not actually true.
Is it not?
And I agreed with Wayne, and I'm wrong. Actually, in Alabama, there. No, I'll give the caveat. This is Wikipedia.
Hmm.
Mhm.
So let's just do that caveat right off front. So in Alabama, there is no requirement for firearm or for permit for purchase or for owner license or any kind of registration. Alaska's the same thing. Arizona, the same thing. There are no requirements. For Arkansas, no requirements.
To buy them or to own them?
Either.
Interesting. I was under the impression that you
No.
have to do a background check with the FBI, no matter where you are.
Nope.
Okay.
And they're not required in Alabama.
Now, is this overall, or is this gun shows specifically private sales?
This is just Wikipedia gun laws in the
Okay.
U.S. by state.
Yeah, I couldn't speak as to exactly which state, but the gun show loophole that I'm referring to is specifically regarding private sales between people.
Private sales, yeah.
Yeah,
Of course, there's nothing. I mean,
it's
even
hard to
in
regulate
Canada,
that.
they're regulated in the fact that you're not allowed to sell one to a person that doesn't have a valid license. But
How do they track that? If
how do you track that? How do you enforce
Yeah.
that? Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So all
you
depending
tell them your gun broke, and
here
then
on
you
the
just sell it to
state
somebody
is
else.
what it depends on. And that
Yes,
is
absolutely.
it's sort of interesting in the U.S. is you can be legal in Arizona, you can go over the border into California and be illegal
Oh, 100%.
and get arrested.
That's why we didn't go too heavily into the stateside stuff today,
Right.
because
Mhm.
that's a whole can of worms that would take hours to unpack
Oh, yeah,
state
for
by
sure.
state.
Yeah, I'll do some research on that statement that I made as well and let you guys know. But
Well, it is interesting though, and I wonder this, if you want to look at logically, wouldn't it be more logical if you had the vote of the people to do it, and if these are what the people wanted and they got it approved, then have at her. And Alberta and BC would be two completely different systems, and wouldn't
Yeah.
that be more logical if people want it, have at her, and all the gun owners are going to move to Alberta,
pretty
or
much
to BC or whatever the case may be,
the
and
Texas of Canada.
yeah,
Yeah, the Texas of Canada.
yeah. And I just wonder if logically, if we're looking for logic and for democracy, if the will of the people is, and I look at the laws in Canada, and I don't think they really are the will of the people, as people never voted on them.
Yeah.
It was imposed on them,
Yeah,
through their elected officials.
to use specifically the changes that were made to gun registration in Canada after that, what was it? Not New Brunswick, Newfoundland shooting.
Hmm.
That's a particular sore spot for me, who is very, very pro democracy and will of the people. That was not voted on. That decision was made
No.
unilaterally by the government.
Yeah.
They were just, we're doing this, boop, done.
Yep.
And that doesn't sit well with me at all.
So if I am the owner of an AR-15 in Canada, if I lived in Canada and I lived in Alberta and I own an AR, and overnight there's a law that says it's illegal now,
Hmm.
what are my options for that gun? I have to leave it in my safe? Is it,
You
so I own it legally, is it legal in my safe if I never take it out?
yes, because I'll show my true colors here a little bit. They haven't figured out a way to take them from us yet
Gotcha.
legally. So we'll get into a slight technicality here. So when we're talking about a firearm in Canada, we're talking about the serialized portion of the firearm. And so what I mean by that is an AR-15 is hundreds of parts.
Right.
And the only part that is the registered AR-15 is the part that houses the trigger mechanism,
Okay.
which is a chunk of aluminum. So once you take it apart, it's parts.
Yeah.
Which are not regulated or controllable by law in the current laws. The uppers, which is an AR-15 comes apart into an upper and a lower. The uppers are also banned on the OIC, but again, you can just take them apart into pieces, and then they're just pieces. So it's some silliness displayed in the logic there, but
Right.
the piece, the lower, that's the registered serialized part, you would have to make arrangements for the RCMP to come get it from you in order to legally turn it in.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you
'Cause
can't
you can't
take
take
it
it
to them.
anywhere. No.
Okay. Which is really interesting in hearing that, because I have a friend in Canada. It actually is a brother-in-law, and he wanted a scope. He wanted one of rifle scopes, and so he asked me, because it was less expensive here in the U.S. So he asked me, are you able to buy it and bring it up? I said, sure, I am. I don't care. So I called the border as I cross a fair bit. So I call because I don't want to get caught doing anything wrong.
Breaking the ITAR. Yeah.
Yeah, and absolutely not. And he went even further. He said, "You are not allowed to do anything on any aspect of a gun. If it is a bolt, if it is like anything on a gun, you are not allowed to cross the border with."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's international. I believe that's UN regulations coming into play, it's designed to prevent arms trafficking. So it's
Works really well.
parts.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
foolproof.
it's
And in Canada,
parts and optics, and there's a many different things that fall under that umbrella. Yeah.
yeah, he said you can move any part of a gun,
Mm-hmm.
like a sight. He said no, you can't bring a sight. He said a screw,
No.
a bolt. If it's engineered and manufactured for a gun, you can't bring it across the border.
Correct.
To throw a curveball at that, imagine how interesting and how not flabbergasted, but how twisted and how convoluted these laws are going to get now that we're getting into this age where you can 3D print parts.
Totally.
If you can just email the designs for a part to a friend and they can 3D print them, where in the world does firearms law and international law come into effect there, and how could they even possibly it's a kerfuffle right now,
Right.
as 3D printing is getting closer and closer to being able to produce functional firearms.
Mm-hmm.
I say functional. We've made ones that can shoot, just not very well.
Right. Well, many different ones. The parts that hold the parts that work have no real stress on them.
Right.
So plastic works just fine, which is a weird concept.
Yeah.
But it makes it, again, pretty much impossible to control that.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll wrap this up. I believe we're all unified in our disdain for the logic of gun control. But I'm going to leave it to you, William, to wrap up and sort of give the progressive angle on it, as I don't think any of us here feel that way, although you may have a better idea of how they think.
Well, I mean, I think I said it already in the sense that I feel like most progressive people, I mean, there's different angles, different avenues that have their own value. I think I know some people who believe that gun control, especially in regards to like handguns and things, should be a lot more strict because handguns are used in most firearm related suicides, which yes, but if you're suicidal, you'll probably find another way. I mean, shooting yourself is just one way of going about it. I don't think whether or not you have a gun is really going to be the defining factor on whether or not you commit suicide. I think it's just a small piece of the puzzle. And things like that. They look at it all through a lens of it being kind of a humanitarian, a compassionate move towards a more peaceful society, which is great and all. But the day you can convince me that people are becoming more peaceful as a whole is the day I'll probably be more supportive of it, which will probably be about the same day pigs fly.
So there is an argument, and it's the only valid one I've ever heard, is who needs an AR-15?
I mean, I want one.
And my argument is why should my wants need to be regulated? And that is where I come from. But there is an argument that says you don't need one, so why do we sell them? But
why do we sell sports cars?
Exactly.
Because they're fun.
Right. Oh, but they kill people, so we shouldn't have them.
Well, I mean, I didn't
McDonald's
want to
kills people.
necessarily. I didn't necessarily want to whip out that analogy, but when we're talking about regulations, licenses, and that sort of thing, I'm not opposed to gun licenses being a thing from the standpoint of making sure that people know what they're doing when they get them. Yeah. But you don't apply for a vehicle license. You take your money and you pass your test and you get it.
Yeah.
That's the way they should work as well.
Right.
If you show that you have the competence to do it, and I mean, I think I'm a little more of a stickler on the background check, but you pass a basic level, a basic check, and you pass the test, go, you're good. Have fun.
Exactly. You pass the requirements, you get the license. There's none of this sending it away to be judged by whoever, the government, right? That's where it becomes an issue for me. It's because who decides whether or not I can do what I want?
Yeah.
If I've never done anything bad or wrong or hurt anybody, then why shouldn't I have it?
I've done lots of bad things, but none of them affected anybody mortally.
Right.
Texting while
William,
driving, maybe.
William
Yeah.
might argue. Well, no, I've never killed anybody, so I've never affected them mortally. But now, William might argue some of
Terrible excuse.
my actions might have affected him, just not mortally.
Yeah.
Yeesh.
Yeah. But that ties back into when we first started about the full auto stuff too, right? Like
Mhm.
the risk is great, which is why I like the analogy to cars, because the risk is great with cars as well. So you need to know what you're doing. You need to get training in order to be a responsible owner. But
I kind of
Just-
stick it up there again with the car analogy. If you own a sports car, then it's painted red and it goes really fast, your insurance premiums will be through the roof. If you're going to own a more dangerous, more aggressive, higher rate of fire firearm, there's probably going to be some more hoops to jump through. I'm relatively okay with that.
yep.
So let me ask you something, William. Again, I want to knock this off. I don't want to hit, although I think you angled in on something that I don't like, and so I have to argue with you a little bit. Why should your vehicle, if it's a Hugo that goes 80 miles or 8 miles an hour, or if you have a Lamborghini which says 180 miles an hour, why should the vehicle insure
Determine
for
your
more?
insurance.
Yes, I think how you drive should affect your
Oh,
insurance.
I think how you drive should
Not the
absolutely
vehicle.
affect your insurance. I think the
So
vehicle.
if you've never had an accident,
it's
why should
it's
it cost you more?
purely statistics. I mean, I don't know from a regulation standpoint in the vehicle's case. In the vehicle's case, it's purely an insurer standpoint. Insurers say, hey, people who own Lamborghinis get in more expensive accidents, so we're going to make insuring Lamborghinis more expensive to incentivize them not to get into accidents. That's just them saving their
Okay,
butts.
statistics. Okay,
So I don't
get
know how far that
statistics.
metaphor goes. It's gonna lose it here somewhere, but
Because I know Wayne has a sports car, so he probably is pissed at what he pays extra a year in insurance.
it's not red though.
so,
No, it's
so what's
black. It goes even faster than the red ones.
so what's the difference in insurance in between your pickup and your Mustang, Wayne?
Actually, the Mustang is less because I work with a pickup. So I'm required to carry extra insurance due to liability for the work. So it's a little bit weird that way. I think my wife's Expedition family vehicle and the car are relatively close.
Okay.
So the car is quite a bit older, so maybe that has something to do with it. But when I was in the age group of risk,
Yes.
it was expensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's another. There's so many other factors that apply into that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So you and your dad ought to live here, as here you can get insurance, which is by the mile. And I know how much you drive your cars, which isn't much. So you probably would get
Not
dirt
much.
cheap insurance.
That's right. Yeah. This year I made an effort to drive it more, but last year I didn't drive it at all.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
Well, that was COVID. You probably didn't want it to get sick.
that's right.
Speaking
Is it
of
wearing a
logic-
mask on the front, Wayne?
Not anymore.
Well, William, on that note, if you'll wrap up the show for us, we'll let our viewers go home.
All right. On that note, thank you for joining
Thanks,
us,
guys.
Wayne.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
Stay
Wayne.
safe, everyone. Don't die.